I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, I'm talking about toxic masculinity by any other name is still toxic masculinity. What I've come to recognize in my life is that men actually don't understand what toxic masculinity is. Let me give some examples. That for many years I was in discussion groups with a guy who was, like me, very interested in community economics. We had 3 different ones, and in the first 2, every time someone talked, he would answer. And I ended up making people conscious of this, and both groups ended up dissolving. In the 3rd one, I was teaching the course to a neighborhood on community economics, and the same thing happened. I realized he couldn't help it, and I had to ask him not to come to the class. In a second example, my dance teacher talks about how it drives her crazy that when she comes into a room late into a dance class, that there will be a man with no sense of spatial awareness who will plunk himself right in the middle of the rows so that everyone is crowded around him. Women, on the other hand, generally, will space themselves. They'll be conscious of, am I blocking someone's view of the mirror? So there's just a lack of how does this affect other people. And then in a third example, I cannot tell you the number of times that I have told a guy that I am writing a book or have written a book on economics, who then proceeds to explain economics to me. I just don't think they can help themselves. So I want to look more at what toxic masculinity is, because I think that having the term tonic being used without any understanding or recognition that such a thing even exists is making it into a fig leaf over toxicity. Let's look at this. I'd like to start by saying something about why I think this is so important. I think that our systems, economic and Judeo-Christian and political, have all been based on toxic masculinity. They're all different forms of a system of domination, something that gives more power to those at the top. Recently, Pepe Escobar wrote, "So creditor oligarchy in fact can be explained as the toxic intersection between globalist wet dreams of total control and militarized full-spectrum dominance. Globalist neoliberal totalitarianism, of course, won't disappear under a sandstorm. At least not yet. There's still a maelstrom of toxicity ahead." So I think it's interesting that he's using that term, and I would also say that we now have something I'd call neoliberal feminism that is aiding and abetting that, where women are using their own ways of saying we can be like a man too. And these can be different. In male sense, that could be military dominance and it could be economic oligarchy, but a woman's side could be more what we look at as wokeism, something in which there's an attention towards others, but that ends up getting weaponized and that ends up getting used against us. I think that psychology and the psyops we're seeing are ways in which our love is being used against us. If you have not loved enough to be manipulated, that's not something to be proud of. I appreciate the generosity of Jay Rollins, who reposted the comment of mine that he had deleted so that viewers can understand where this started. Let me read that to you now. Beautifully written, W. Curiously enough, I am planning to do another episode on my term of tonic masculinity today. When I coined it, it was as a world that puts children at the center, surrounded by women who are surrounded by men. Tonic masculinity. I agree that it's not for women to tell men what masculinity is, but it wasn't about masculinity as opposed to femininity, or feminine traits in men, gay men, trans men, or women. The term was tonic as opposed to toxic, healing as opposed to hurting. What needs to be healed? Per my definition, the relationship between men and women in doing the work of the world, raising the next generation, not as a single family, but as the reason societies exist, the reason humanity hasn't died out. I've been struggling with how to say that it feels very hurtful and not very tonic that the only reference to me has been Mark's in saying that I've been doing a meta-series essentially about the guys using my term. I can't help feeling that if Charles Eisenstein had written it, rather than me in response to him, it would have been attributed every time. And Jay, I can't help noticing that after you, with my blessing, stole it from me, it was taken from you so that the interview of the Tonic 7 didn't include you or William. In fact, it was taken by someone you described as the angriest person you've ever known, who is intentionally offensive in his references to women, who is hostile towards gay and trans people, not just how it's been weaponized, and believes men should be bullied, and is also someone whose insight and intelligence I respect and don't want to alienate. What will be the backlash of me writing that? To be cut out? To be just another critical woman? I don't know. But if I'm not saying it because I'm afraid, whatever makes me afraid is toxic by definition. It's become the exact opposite of what I meant by tonic. I'm not the authority on the term because I'm no longer the author, and I think that authority has been taken from me because I'm a woman. In response to that, Jay wrote, "The point of the concept is that it's everybody's. I wanted it out in the world, and out in the world it is. The Tonic 7 did a fine job of broadcasting it on Allie's show, and since it apparently hasn't registered to you that I don't feel the same sense of entitlement that you do to ownership of a concept that I am, at best, polishing up and resubmitting to the collective unconscious, let me be explicit that they had and have my blessing. Please don't accuse me of threatening you again. It's not true, and it cheapens the project you claim to care about. At the end of the day, you shoehorned a grievance into my comment section on someone else's guest post. Then, when you got an entirely appropriate and entirely polite dismissal of your attempt to divert another woman's spotlight, you conveniently forgot the content of said grievance. Don't cast aspersions on my ethical standards or decisions, Teresa. This is about your belated recognition that a phrase you didn't invent and don't own is popular and you didn't get to brand it, not about anyone else's ethics. Personally, I think it's bonkers that you, a woman, are trying to own and contain the definition of healthy masculinity, but whatever. You want to define it, buy a time machine. You want to monetize it, you're going to have an easier time, and I certainly wouldn't try to stand in your way. Be my guest." The point I've made in return to some of these comments, and I won't quote all of them, is that it isn't about credit or ownership. Let's say I was the person who developed the term regenerative agriculture to describe my way of farming. I would want people to steal my term all day and all night, and I would never care if they gave me credit, because what I want is for that idea to get traction. I want to save the world. And so if someone like Monsanto took it and said, well, we think this applies to our hybrid GMO plants with a lot of chemicals on them because they grow better and come back better, then what they would have done is steal my term and destroy the meaning in order to apply that to something that was its opposite. So what I feel that Jay has done is that he's taken those two words, lopped them off, as if he is, instead of grafting them onto his own tree something that would be beneficial and that I would have loved. Instead, he's pulling out my term by the roots and saying, well, this seems like something that is vibrant and has a lot of life to it. Now I'm going to graft on my meaning. And I think that that meaning is something that I would describe as toxic. In a later response, what Jay wrote was, competition between men is basic to masculinity, Teresa. Competition with men as a woman, on the other hand, makes you Little Miss Bossy Pants. The fact that you don't understand the first makes you fundamentally unqualified to judge masculinity, let alone define it for men. The fact that you don't understand the second is either the cause or the result of your social tone deafness and general inability to read a room, particularly but not limited to any room some authority figure hasn't placed you in charge of. So I don't even think I need commentary there to show how that is demonstrating the exact opposite of what I meant by my term. Read the room. Men don't want you here. We're talking man stuff, big ideas. Who authorized you to open your mouth? And how dare you claim to be the author and authority on what came out of it? Jay then followed that up with, point me to the threat or lawyer up, Teresa. In fact, I'd suggest a retraction. I'm not a fan of being defamed. So I think what he's saying is that if I say that he's threatening me, he's going to sue. And I'm thinking maybe that he and Robert Malone could go in on Stephen Biss and get a package deal. And maybe that's unless I recant and say, oh yes, it is tonic masculinity to threaten people with lawsuits. But this sarcasm must be catching because Daniel D. also did, in his blog, A Ghost in the Machine, a parody of an apology, and that got a lot of great comments on it, including ones like, if pure jackassery did not exist, it would be necessary to invent it. The current controversy and actions of Ms. Teresa seem to fit the bill. And I'm sure there were a lot of high fives after that one. A few more that I'll read you as examples. One is from Grant Smith, who says, you have no a priori claim to respect, attention, authority, deference, or consideration for the usage of these terms or anything else, nor do I. These things must be earned. I find attempts to cloak desires for recognition with appeals to propriety off-putting. I presume this is merely a product of my nature. I prefer to engage in the world of ideas as a prestige hierarchy. I allocate attention based on appreciation and admiration for excellence. I don't care who came up with what first. I only care who can deliver excellent ideas with which to engage. I also don't expect anyone to read or recommend my shit if they don't think it is worth their time. I don't think the phrase has inherent value. The phrase tonic masculinity isn't what is useful or interesting. It is the definition my boys provided for it that makes it useful and interesting, at least from my perspective. I think I just said I wasn't impressed with it until I read Harrison's article, which should give you an idea about how I value ideas. This extends to intellectual property, which I'm quite skeptical of. I don't expect you to agree, but ideas aren't worth anything to me until they are transformed into something useful. In this case, I think the only thing that makes tonic masculinity useful is as a heuristic to facilitate the harnessing of innate character strengths and personality variables to cultivate virtue, which can easily be abstracted beyond masculinity, which is what my article was about. If you want to have any chance of winning, You should focus on making a compelling case as to why your preferred usage of the term is superior, instead of focusing on issues of propriety. I would say something cheeky like, "It's our term now, come and take it." But the fact of the matter is, I don't think any of us have any desire to continue to talk about masculinity. We've all said our piece and moved on. This is why we are the tonic 7 and not the tonically masculine 7. Is it safe for me to assume that you don't claim the word tonic as your own? So in this one, what I replied was, if it's the content and not the term, use the content. You have full ownership of that as something you have authority over. But if things were not getting that kind of attention, that John Carter's tonic masculinity post got the most reads of anything he's put out there, and no one was interviewing them as the tonic 7 before this term, then don't say it's the content and not the term if you're going to be using the term. Another reply from Doc Hammer was, in this case, proper masculinity is being willing and able to do violence, to stand up for what is right, the overabundance being excessive violence of a serial killer. The difference between how men and women tend to act are important and necessary for men and women's cooperation, and forcing one to be more like the other than their nature inclines them is going to cause them problems and lead to vice. For example, men are more disagreeable in the personality trait sense than women. So yes, on average, when there is an unpopular thing that needs said at personal risk, it will be a man saying it. Trying to beat that tendency out of men because it is deemed too confrontational is bad for men and bad for society. Finally, if we didn't sufficiently define toxic masculinity, it is only because there is no clear definition other than whatever wailing Twitter blue checks don't like, or perhaps anything your great-grandfather would have considered normal masculine behavior. So that goes to my point that this is a group of men who don't really believe that toxic masculinity is a thing. They think this is something that the left made up fairly recently, and that there was no actual behavior that captured. So with Doc Hammer, I'd have to say that in terms of being disagreeable and standing up and saying something despite the fact that, people are not going to like it, I think that's a masculine quality I think I'm going to have to claim. One of my readers, Jim Austin, got into a lengthy discussion with Doc Hammer on evolution. One of the things that Jim wrote was, when women started to make headway in science, the story had to change to reflect the evidence. Neoteny and maternal care oxytocin, coupled with maternal culture, made male apes human. Yes, we are a maternalized species. No other group of male apes can get along like human, nor take care of offspring, cooperate for so long without ripping penises off, or focus on other goals besides sex and violence. That's all from maternalized males. Jim gives 9 different citations for his claims, including Richard Wrangham, author of The Demonic Male, Apes, and the Origin of Human Violence. To this, Daniel responded, "Wow, are these the pickup lines you use at feminist rallies?" And then Daniel wrote his own post, which is called A Confession and a Heartfelt Apology, and a desperate plea for the editors of Bartlett's Book of Quotations to update their entry on the term tonic masculinity. Some quotes from that are, "I must offer a confession and a truly heartfelt apology to those I have offended and wronged with my words. As the woke Marxists have taught us, offensive words are literal violence and are therefore bad, though literal violence is good and beautiful because it is the voice of the unheard, such as oppressed elected officials of color. Yesterday I was informed via an angry treatise cataloging my own and several other substackers' sins that I am a third-hand term stealer. It turns out this term was the sole and exclusive intellectual property of one Teresa Carraggio, who is quite irate that it was used without her permission and, to add insult to injury, used in a way that she considers to have been the twisting of tonic masculinity. So she is now demanding every subsequent user of this term give her credit for inventing it, or, failing that, to cease and desist immediately from the use of her term in any and all written, verbal, or telepathic forms of communication. So to all my fans and admirers and groupies and pen pals and members of my fan club and so forth, I have to come clean with you all. I did not use the term tonic masculinity secondhand, as I initially claimed. No, regrettably, I used this term thirdhand. And like Mr. Salzman and his band of time-traveling plagiarists who used the term in 2019, I did not give credit to the original wordsmith, Ms. Teresa Carraggio, for inventing the term in 2022. A very interesting response on Daniel's post was from Allie, the host of Real Femme Sapiens, who had interviewed them as the Tonic Seven. One of the things she said is that she was hesitant to interview them based on this term tonic masculinity because she felt it implied toxic masculinity and she didn't believe in it. And so she had to explain to her audience, give these guys a chance. It's an interesting concept. Don't judge them based on this term tonic, because really they have a different philosophy. And so I think she exactly outlined what my issue is. The only reason tonic masculinity makes sense as a word, as a phrase, as a definition is in opposition to toxic masculinity. If this is a group that doesn't believe that that exists, then it's not the right term for them. Even though it's not in response to my post, I think that something that John Carter put on notes is pertinent. He wrote, "Yeah, you're toxic, retrograde, racist, spits, white men. But we need you to go die for us in Taiwan and Ukraine. So just forget about how much we despise and come be all you can be." Now, anyone who's been reading me knows my feeling about Taiwan and Ukraine and those being used as proxy wars. So I think that that is toxic masculinity. The impulse for us to be dominant over other countries and maintain this hegemony is the outer sign of something that I think we're allowing to exist in our personal relationships. So some of the things that I see as toxic masculinity are the Great Reset, depopulation, geoengineering, bioweapons disguised as vaccines, central bank digital currencies, small business bankruptcies, home dispossessions, widespread cancers, famine through destruction of farms and animals. The list goes on and on. This is what we're up against, and that's why we need to change this paradigm. To follow this up, I'm going to suggest we need to agree, not on an answer, but on a process and our principles. And then also forgiving Hitler, which Jay has cited as evidence of me being a moral reprobate. Thank you for watching.